G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Off Ukraine War Update for the 11th of May 2026. As we look at the Ukraine map from Ukraine, we see that there are reported points of contact as well as, well, these are not just exchange of gunfire but artillery and drones. There were 27 strike drones overnight. Now these were, according to the Russians, attacks on themselves, drone launch sites. The Russians claim they were defending themselves, that the Ukrainians have broken the ceasefire many times. And along the points of contact, we see a lot of it is in the buffer zones, all the usual places where the Russians are concentrated. Kupiansk, Lyman, Koshnikovia. Oh, this was the Pavos front, but I suppose you call it still the Donetsk front. And the Zaporozhye front. There's a little bit here where the Russians are concentrated as well. Yeah, it's mostly troop concentrations where the Russians are concentrated now. As you can see, remember, Ukraine held bitterly, saying Pavlovsk would never fall. And remember when they liberated Dnipro? That's what? Russia. It's like wow. But then I realised that Ukrainians don't see this map. They don't know what's happening. They only get fragments, like these little fragment maps here. So the Ukrainians say the Russians are on their way to Jabilia and they got liberated. The Ukrainians don't know that. There's no freedom of movement in Ukraine, except for a few. Most people are confined to their towns, or at least their oblast. And most of the people in this region are either on the Russian side of the conflict, they're not here anymore. Most of the people here are soldiers or volunteers for Ukraine. The civilians who want to be Ukrainian are all relocated to or volunteers, or they've gone to the Russian side. I do think sooner or later, but for now, Russia's pledge was to liberate the Donbass and protect Crimea. Now they added the Zaporozhye and Kherson front to protect Crimea, to create a trade corridor, and also in part because the Russia knows the source of the conflict is Ukraine's debt, and in order to pay their debt, they had to sell the rights to the oil, and they want to just take it back. But the sticking point is, and the trade deal is, and the whole there's a trade deal on the table as well. Don't forget, there's the Trump trade deal. There's the Europe trade deal with Ukraine for weapons. There's the energy deal, which US may or Europe wants back. Believe it or not, Europe wants their 30% discounted oil back. They're desperately, like yesterday. There is some oil flowing, of course, and Ukraine is letting it flow because Europe is giving them proceeds of the rations, allegedly, but it's not, and you'll know it's not. You'll know it's just Euroclear giving them money because Europe is racking up the debt, and they're all going to write down this, what is it now? No one knows. Is it 200, 300, 400, 800 billion euros? Plus the cost of rebuilding Ukraine for the next 100 years. I mean, Keir Starmer's a joke, but it's all about showing how kind you are. And that's why they can't back out of the war, because they have to side with the resistance. Otherwise, their whole politics falls apart, their politics of resistance. So, despite all the ceasefire violations, Russia hasn't launched any long-range attacks into Ukraine. They've only hit probably Kharkiv and Dnipro, though the explosions in Zaporozhye were Ukrainian drones. It's an old one. They attacked a delivery vehicle for some reason. No explanation. They never do. Even they're claiming Russia attacked a train. That was a drone attack, but it was a transport train of troops, and it appeared the drone was launched from within Ukraine. And yeah, it's like the rail yard attack. That turned out to be vandalism. Okay, yes, they said it was a drone attack, and they showed a burnt out train. No, some rail yard thieves to distract the guard set fire to a train engine, and while they were fighting that fire, they broke into the warehouse and stole weapons. So, not everything Ukraine claims is true, but no one wants the truth. So, moving on. For those who do want the truth, you can support the channel by buying a coffee mug today. Empire of Elves, that is one word, Empire of Elves, myshopify.com. Sorry, empireofelves.myshopify.com. Links in the description. Everything helps the channel in order for me to buy a new microphone, buy a new computer, to moving on to bring you, of course, wonderful news that Russia has pulled off long-range intercept. Now, you're going to say, but what about Venezuela, China, Iran, China? Remember, Russia has been pushed out of many countries by Chinese arms deals undercutting them. But as we saw during the India conflict, the Timu missiles from Pakistan were shot down by the Russian S-350s, although they're not called S-350s. See, Russia exports a lot of technology and missiles to countries who are probably never going to use them, and they don't export that much. But they do export it. But it's, they do export. Most of this stuff is never going to be used, thank God. But still, there's a clear distinction between now a growing gulf between Russia and China. And remember, China used to be Russia's biggest customer, and it's now turning around, and China is trying to sell everything to the world at a discount, which nobody can compete with, and then buy everything and shut it down and move it to China. And recently, Putin did stop a takeover of a truck plant, which is also a tank plant, and also was an electric vehicle plant, but that fell through. I think the Russians have consolidated a lot of their technologies to save money. Don't forget, their internal economy is only the size of Italy. remember, Russia's no longer the second largest supplier of arms in the world. That is now China. And yeah, Russian arms cost more, but for some reason, until recently, HIMARS have only been intercepted by short range. Now these are very fast missiles, but they are short range. But a long range intercept is something new. This is the M2. It's an intermediate system, although it's considered long range for a missile intercept. Because usually by the time they're detected, HIMARS. But yeah, Ukraine's been trying to launch HIMARS at long range. And you're going to say, wait, isn't this all staged? No, it's recreated. Illustration of how the process goes about. They launch and intercept. Yeah. And by the way, this is realistic. Lots of Ukraine is large open fields like this, which is why, and parts of Russia too, which is why sometimes when a town falls, the Russians either take time before they go hop, because they have to cross a large open area. Now, yeah, they have a that's your average battery, by the way. You have your missiles, you have your radar, you have your command station, and they're sitting out there what should be a wheat field. Well, probably once was a wheat field. Remember, Russia's during the post-war period had a lot of internal turmoil where large wheat fields went untended. They lost a lot of manpower. And some of them still today are now military reserves where air defences sit. And these air defences sit, in the middle of this field the size of a small town that could have been feeding people, but there is a glut of wheat. So Russia's never reclaimed many of these wheat fields, which has been to the detriment where, so, yeah, much to the detriment. I mean, they should do something more with it, but yeah, what are you going to do? The world's hostile to Russia, particularly Europe. And even China is hostile to Russia, just no one wants to admit it. Now, these semi-autonomous missiles, they do require a bit of programming before they're launched, and they need a bit of update guidance as they fly. But most of them increasingly are no longer in constant contact because electronic warfare. But yeah, to show you an intercept. Now that's actually a little clustered, but yeah, usually you have the intended target. You have a spread of different air defences, and they will be from, short. But with HIMARS, they can go arcing over the short range. And so Russia has been working on how to get long-range intercepts, and it seems that they have been able to pull that off and stop. And this is why Ukraine has stopped the Flamingo program. They tried the HIMARS as well, but they've not been able to. Now, they are targeting air defences. It's not just targeting Donetsk anymore. They're targeting the air defences at Donetsk with long-range HIMARS. They've also tried glide bombs. Now, a missile intercept of glide bombs. Ukraine has done that occasionally as well. Uh, but, yeah. The new air defense system, yeah, they have. Sometimes you'll see it with two missiles. The book system, they have two, four, and now six tube. Now the ones in the tube, these are because they're programmable. They need program the missile, protect it from weather, and also protect the vehicle from the blast from the rocket fuel. I think this is where the video starts to loop on itself. But yeah, there's the actual intercept. Bang. It's not very big. Now they check. Yeah, this is the point. Missiles do explode prior to target. And they can't turn that fast. But it's just advertising now, I think. But when you pull off something as successful as a HIMARS intercept at long range, yeah, older systems seem to have the missiles outside of the tube. I don't know why they've gone back to putting them in tube or took them out in the first place. But yeah, long range intercepts like that. And someone could still say, hey, it's the opposite. Yeah, a lot of the old systems, there are systems in tube. Like the S300, they did start with some systems in tube. But I think the reason why there's a lot of in tube systems now is so that they have a one shelf system where, right, you've got a missile and tube that can go to a tank, a ship, a base, instead of, oh, we have to load these missiles in the ship tubes. No, ship tubes are pulled out. When a ship tube is used, it's removed and replaced. And they call them cells, I know. But, yeah, training fields, simulate the fields of Ukraine. I don't think there's anything else. Command center. Now, you caught a bit at the end with that drone. That's their new long-range surveillance drone. Russia's began exporting their surveillance drones to China. One of the few things that China still buys, surveillance drones. Now, the EU is in talk with Russia. They're arguing at the moment who should represent the EU. Now, the last EU delegation was rejected because I think it contained a Ukrainian. Now, they're not Ukrainian recent, but they are still Ukrainian. I mean, they were from Ukraine, but not recently. That's the rumor. It's neither here nor there. Russia rejected them. US rejected the delegation because they showed up wanting to be part of the talks in Turkey. Now, Kaja Kallas is representative of Foreign Affairs and Security for the EU Foreign Affairs Council. Now, they want their delegation to be included in the next round of negotiations. Now, this is to be held between the European Union and Russia. And they have demands, and this is the informal meeting that has been scheduled to take place in Cyprus. They have had informal talks before, but when they showed up for the formal talks, they were told no, because they weren't invited. They felt upset that they were excluded. But the reason why they were excluded was there was US trade talks, US security talks. The US is trying to secure materials that Russia has, but is sent for processing in China. They're trying to secure an alternative deal, and so there's other things going on in the world other than Ukraine, like the settlement in Syria. Russia is part of the process in Iran, whether anyone likes it or not. Every conflict is now getting linked to every other conflict. You can't solve Iran unless you solve Ukraine. You can't solve Ukraine unless you solve Iran. And you can't get things settled going in Syria until you deal with Iran. So every negotiator now is trying to add extra pressure. All right, so extra pressure is not appreciated, to say the least. But EU apparently needs concessions from the Russians. But the issue of European security. Russia constantly attacks its neighbours, and how we can prevent this. Russia has not constantly attacked its neighbours. Russia's had less wars than you've had. You're the ones who attacked Serbia. You're the ones who attacked the separatists in Ukraine. You're the ones who attacked the protesters in Crimea, Odessa, Donbass. Europe doesn't want to admit it. Now, Latvia, as I said, heads will roll. Latvia has been allowing Ukraine to launch drones from in Latvia. But Latvia says no, they were only flyovers. A drone with very short range can fly over Latvia and then attack deep into Russia. No. They don't fly over. They're fueled and launched. The same from surveillance drones in the Baltic. They're launched out of Poland as well as Latvia. Poland was able to catch the Ukrainian, hold him for a while, get a bit of concessions out of the Ukrainians, and then send him back. Several NATO countries bordering Russia have reported cases of Ukrainian unmanned drones crashing there instead of Russia. Now, this is the official reason why the Latvian defense minister is resigning. Not because of the drones, but because Ukrainian drones were found to have crashed in Latvia, and he wasn't able to cover it up in time. Now, Russia tracked and showed the tracking of a Ukrainian drone crossing into Latvia unchallenged and heading towards Russia when it crashed in Rizhny, 40 kilometers from the border. Now, these fixed-wing aircraft, they can be both surveillance and a weapon. Usually surveillance, but they can be a weapon. Now, why isn't a flamingo, you may ask? Because flamingos are like the V1. They're fast, but they're very narrow in their arcing. They can't take a sophisticated path. So if they cannot map a path through a straight line to their target, they can't use the flamingo because it can't fly. It's a rocket that goes up and then falls with grace. It's a glide bomb with a rocket. But it can't steer. It's a single engine, remember? Rockets. Elon Musk figured out how to steer rockets and guide them, and you've seen that. Now, Ukrainian settlement talks have stalled. Why? Well, Russia says, from its point of view, is because Ukraine has refused to pull its troops out of Donbass. Now, from what I've read, and initially, the Russian peace deal was 1, 2, 3. Then they said 1, 2, right? We'll freeze the frontier, right? Freeze the frontier, and withdraw from this territory, and Don't forget, this was much smaller. This was much smaller. This was much smaller. They were going to give up the buffer zone in the north, or right. I'm going to try to, some of these little bits here outside of the Donbass, but yeah, they would basically put the border here and drop it right down, right across Donbass, drop it right down through here. Now it's expanded only a little bit here. Most of the advancing has in Kherson has long stopped. But Zaporozhye, there's been some advancing, but most of it's been here in the Donbass. Now, as you can zoom out, you can see it's still, this is about 20, 30, 20, right? They've lost territories, right? So it's more closely 20, 25, 30. Now, Ukraine, of course, has said not 1 inch. We will not give an inch, right? They won't even sign a peace deal at the frozen front line. They want the front line. They want full removal. They want this turned into a buffer zone. And I think Europe wants to extend that. That's why there's going to be no peace deal. It's not loading. Okay. There's Belarusia, right? They want Belarusia. Here we go. Okay, from here. Right. So you got the part that borders Finland, Sweden, and that, right? So they want one big buffer zone, right? Down through here, and Belarusia, and completely disarmed, all that, right? Completely disarmed. You know the logistics of that alone? And then, yeah. See, Ukraine was the buffer zone. Ukraine doesn't want to be disarmed. See, now we get why Ukraine doesn't want to be disarmed. Because they want to make money selling weapons to Europe. They want to sell their drones. Why does Europe want all these drones if they're peaceful? Oh no, we need them for defense. No, they need surveillance drones. And it's an alternative to buying from China, because it turns out everything they spy on, China can also spy on. This was what happened in Israel. So they're desperately trying to get rid of the Chinese technology, and they can't produce it themselves at a lower cost. This is the problem. Europeans want high wages and to pay next to nothing for goods. That does not happen. You have to bring it to here, right? You have to bring it to here. They just don't want to do that. Nothing. Europe doesn't want anything fixed. They want constant chaos. But neutrality of Ukraine may be off the table. Europe is trying to negotiate a oil and highway transit point. Okay, they want now. Apparently, Russia also wants Nord Stream. So everything is changing every day. But between the US and Russia, they want to expand the number of countries in the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. Now, North Korea may become a neutral country, or at least a non-hostile country. In recent talks, North Korea isn't giving up its nuclear weapons, but it may limit its nuclear weapons and give up unification with South Korea in return for a recognition and normalization of trade. Now that could be a huge victory for both North Korea and the rest of the world, while a salty wound in that the last thing the anti-communists want, but the neocons, and not all neocons are Republicans, but the war hawks like Hillary, they don't want it. They think they can hold out. Now, it's the same in Cuba. I think I think North Korea and Cuba just aren't there yet. Um, I've always said you've got to let communism fail on its own, and as we're seeing with China, it does fail on its own. Now, North Korea has been subsidized for so long. Um, I think, we don't want to. One of the reasons why a lot of people don't want the blockade on North Korea lifted is because they don't want to start taking care of them and their problems. But North Korea, I think, just get in line. Now you might say, what about Vietnam? Well, the reason why Vietnam isn't failing is because it's almost capitalism. Right? It's almost just another capitalist country with a dictatorship. I mean, and then you just got to leave that alone for a while, and eventually the party will split. This happens. This does happen. It's just so rare that it becomes but no country has ever been able to go. I mean, you look at the last 200 years, you'll see usually a split ends in war. I mean, you saw American Civil War was the last big split where the ruling party, yeah, that's right. America had a single ruling party. It split and became a multi-party, and a lot of those parties originally were holdovers from the British Empire, but still, it had a one-party system. Well, it tried to be a no-party system, but that's still a one-party system. But North Korea and Cuba, I think and Vietnam will all go the same way America did, and it will, as proven by history, take a long time without war. And I think the transformation of Iran will take a long time without war. And I think Israel is pushing too hard for its own security at the expense of everyone else, instead of realizing that it's a small country that now has to realize that it can't keep growing. And technically, it's two countries that can't keep growing. Now, I'm against it taking over Gaza. I think the Trans-Gaza Council should be transitional only. I think the Gaza Strip should be separate from the West Bank. Because it is culturally different, and it is culturally being one of the cities. It's one of the original city-states of the region. It's been conquered by everyone and never really treated well by anyone. I mean, it was held by Egypt. And for a long time it was part of Egypt. But culturally and culturally and so forth, I think it's just one of those places that should be. It's just been there for so long that it just should be a city-state to itself. Because there are ways for Gaza, either as a port or a communications hub or a big tourist destination, but I think it's running out of the options now because of the hostility of its people to foreigners. I think ultimately too many people have this attitude of solving through conflict, and liberals have always talked a big talk about peace, but as you can see, they rarely can achieve it, can they, without occupying something? And that's the problem. The Canadian model of peacekeeping, however, is failing because they won't do the next step. They'll go in and occupy, but when things go wrong, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to restore order. They don't know how to train to be a police force or deal with multi-complex issues like Mogadishu and the corruption and the world media's corruption and sensationalizing. And NATO itself doesn't seem to know what it wants to be anymore. For a while, they were just waiting for the go orders to invade the Soviet Union. Then they were waiting for the go orders to defend against the Soviet Union. Now they don't know what to do, so they wanted to be peacekeeper. But they've kept no peace. They have not protected the civilians of Europe. They've protected everyone else. And all they've done is be bludgeon against European countries who don't want to fall into the liberal New World Order. And so Europe trying to acquire Ukraine simply on the... At first it looked like, they just wanted Ukraine grain and Ukraine resources. And then they wanted, Ukraine owes us money. We want to extract our profit. But now it looks like it wanted Ukraine as a staging area to attack Russia. And that's because Keir Starmer let the cat out of the bag, a month ago when he says, our ultimate goal is the breakup of the Soviet Union. I was like, what? They've already broken up, Keir Starmer. And he says, and then he corrected later saying, I meant Russia. Russia's acting like the Soviet Union. They need to be broken up anyway. And it's like, why? You're acting, isn't that the speech that Roosevelt said to Churchill over the British Empire? Yeah. But isn't that eventually what will happen to Europe? Aren't you now just an empire and you're using foreigners as an occupying force to keep the people scared and disorganized and have a hostile force killing off any opposition party without you lifting your finger? Come on. Now, Iran is a different conflict. America's right. They saw the mess in Iraq and said, well, look what happens when we get involved in Iraq and all these countries. Ultimately, these rebels turn against us. Isn't that what America did with turn against France? I mean, you haven't learned from your own history, it seems. And yes, you did turn against France because you realised the only reason why they helped you was to use you as a, enemy of my enemy is my friend. They were only your friend because you were the enemy of their enemy. Once you took care of their enemy, they were going to conquer you because you had now weakened yourself because you were the enemy and fighting their enemy. Yeah, they were going to try and conquer you, but had Louisiana not been a complete and utter failure in total mismanagement by the French, who thought you could just go to Louisiana and be French in a swamp, and you, for whatever reason, you didn't want to develop anything or move inland or make trade or peace with the natives. I mean, everything was going wrong for a reason. And this is why things go wrong in Ukraine, is that you haven't learnt, right? Ukraine hasn't made peace with itself. Okay, until Ukraine makes peace with itself, how are they going to make peace with Russia? Or how can they be part of Europe when they're nothing but a stopover from cigarette smuggling out of Turkey or Russia? Because cigarettes are so cheap in Turkey and Russia and so expensive in Europe. And Europe hasn't realised you can't send in peacekeeping forces into Ukraine. You have to rebuild its police force, disarm most of its army. You have to start dealing with the fanatics. And they don't want to pay that price. And the best thing for Ukraine or Moldavia or any Latvia or any of these small countries was to be part of a regional trade organization, not part of an empire. Because now They know what to do. They don't have any autonomy. They can't pass any. They see a lot of them joined Europe thinking they were going to protect their country's cultural identity, not have it stripped from them. So Europe is headed for disaster. Uh, Now, Europe wants to be like Russia. That's the problem. Europe wants, but Russia's been able to reconcile its ethnicities in the fact that it was one big empire created by the Mongols, and the Rus are a minority in their own country, right? Some of them, like the Cossacks, are Rus and Mongol, and you've got the Slavs and Mongols, and you've got all these different groups. But because they all speak a common language, like Europe doesn't have that common language, and that's why they're trying to erase cultural identities, and that will not work. And why they want to pick Islam, for Christ's sake, this is again the communist mentality of getting rid of the olds. So you have a complex problem created by complex politics, by people who are trying to make things complex to keep it in the hands of a few. Politicians make politicians complex so that only those who speak polyspeak can participate. It's the same with lawyers, computers. They geeks overcomplicate everything to gatekeep, and or to create their own cultural identity, but it's usually to gatekeep. Psychologically, this is how languages differentiated. The Slavic languages differentiated, how Ukraine differentiated itself from Russia, even though they're the same people. They are, however, a mix of Slavs and Rus, so they are slightly different, but they have a dialect of Russian, not a unique identity like, say, Romania or Belarusia, although even Belarus is getting close to that. Is it really a separate country? But I say let it be. Let it be a separate country. I think eventually just separate the two, separate the Ukraine from the Ukraine, and be done with it. And both be demilitarized, although Russia won't like that. But, I think ultimately Ukraine is just angry. They want to be angry externally because they don't want to face their internal problems. And until that happens, and Europe is not the mature people in the room, it's scary. Because you used to think back when I was young, Europe was the mature voice where you had blistering and bluster from people like Bill Clinton. Although Ronald Reagan was, oh, wow. But Europe thought, wow, we're finally getting some maturity out of America. Then we get Clinton and Bush, and that was, just, solve everything with a hammer, right? Although Clinton was more, I distract everybody while the military solves things with a hammer. I think people nostalgize both Reagan and Clinton, but it's just a period where conflicts were smaller and rarer and easier to understand, and because they were easier to understand, the terrorists have evolved. They've realised how to turn things into complex issues. Use the past to and political activists in the West how to infiltrate the West using Chinese money, and we have Chip Roy now calling it all out, and whether or not it leads to a solution in Ukraine is possible, because the more you dissolve problems, the more you'll expose the Chinese influence in Ukraine to be a conflict, like the dumping of large amounts of ammunition cheap, the setting up and building of drone factories and all these other things in Ukraine, were all opportunities that Ukraine now, some of these factories have been transferred to UK, and UK's given them the Ukraine and give them technologies, and now buying them back. It's like, that's not how investment works. That's how destroying yourself works. Helping others should never come at your own expense. I don't care what you say about the Bible. Okay, I think that's oversimplification. I think the Bible never was about an absolute. Okay, it was more about what happens between two people living side by side, not nations as a whole giving up everything to the poorer nations, because the poorer nations don't lift themselves up by the bootstraps. Most people, yeah. So, the state of the Ukraine war, however, again, like I said, if you can unravel and the other problems, the more the Ukraine stands out and the more embarrassed Ukraine is on the world stage as a parasite state. And the more Europe will be embarrassed for supporting it. And they will want to rectify that. And the more people who don't want to be part of the EU, the more the EU looks like an embarrassment, because it's not a mature trade organisation, it's an imperialist bureaucracy. One that is waging a proxy war against Russia by using Ukraine, and it doesn't matter if Russia started it or not. For whatever reason, right, Ukraine can't lose because they have all of Europe behind it. Well, that's what they thought in Afghanistan, right? Or Vietnam, or Cuba. And as shown by the US in Venezuela, unless you have a decisive victory and a plan for decisive victory and a means for decisive victory, Europe should not have gotten involved in Ukraine and should have kept to its so-called liberal ideals of solving with words, not violence. Yet, as we see increasingly around the world, liberals calling for violence, showing us once and for all, liberalism is nothing more than fascism with a mask. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.